Whispers in the walls. When I awoke, my bedside clock stared at 3:17 a.m. Confused, I groped for my cell, the screen glow briefly stunning. I had a voicemail. Odd, I hardly ever got calls, much less voicemails. I hesitantly swiped to play. The ensuing silence was dense, filled with static that tickled my skin. And then a voice, unmistakably my own, but twisted, distorted, as though it had been pulled across pebbles and blasted through a shattered speaker, whispered, "They're in the walls." The recording ended suddenly. My heart pounded against my ribcage. I replayed it. Again. Again. The hushed words lingered, eerily distinct, each successive playing sowing a seed of cold fear in my mind. My own voice, distorted into a monstrosity, threatening something in the confines of my dwelling. I lived by myself in a Victorian home I had inherited from my great-aunt Beatrice. It was a pretty home, with intricate woodwork and stained glass windows, but it had a certain atmosphere. It felt as though it was watched, a weight to the air, the feeling the home had some things to tell but wasn't willing to. I'd always put it down to the home being old, to the creaks and groans of the settling wood, but the voicemail altered all of it. They're in the walls. Who were they, and what was it to be? In the walls. The rational part of my mind shouted in my ears that it was a prank, a cruel jest at the hands of some unknown tormentor. But the raspy quality of the voice, the icy import of the words, felt real. Too real to ignore. I sat bolt upright in bed, hugging the covers to my body. The house was quiet, the only sound the usual creaks and pops I learned to ignore. Now, every creak sounded amplified, each with an ominous undertone. A floorboard groaned above. A window shook in the wind. The old home seemed to be holding its breath, waiting. I pushed myself to take a deep breath and attempt to think sensibly. Could I have sleepwalked and left the message myself? It was a ridiculous possibility. I had not sleepwalked since I was a child. The other possibility, that something was really moving around in the walls, was even crazier. I got up from bed with my legs feeling like lead. I had to see. I had to confirm to myself it was nothing, that I was paranoid. I reached for a flashlight on my nightstand and crept into the hallway. The corridor was a dim one, the moonlight coming through the colored glass windows casting strange shadows on the walls. The air was chill, chillier than it ought to be at the late end of summer. I hugged my robe around my body. I began with the most obvious location, the wall behind my bedroom. I touched the wallpaper, running my hand along it to detect any irregularities, any concealed opening. Nothing. The wall was solid to the touch, even and unexceptional. I then put my ear to the wall and listened. I could hear nothing at first. But then a faint scratching, barely audible, caught my attention. It was a gentle noise, the sound of small claws moving across the wood. I backed away from the wall, my heart racing in my chest. The sound of scratching had come to a halt. Had I dreamed it all along? Was my mind playing a cruel trick on me? I listened once again, holding my breath. Nothing. And then the scratching sound again, closer now, louder. It was most certainly coming from the interior of the wall. I edged backwards slowly, my gaze darting nervously around the room, seeking an explanation, an avenue of escape. The scratching increased, becoming a desperate, intensive sound. It was joined by the low, guttural growl, a sound which seemed to shake the foundations of the building. Raw, primal fear consumed me. I spun around and fled back to my bedroom, slamming the door shut after me. I struggled with the lock, my hands shaking so hard I could hardly manage to insert the key. I leaned on the door after it was closed, catching my breath. The growling and the scratching sounded louder now, threatening. They were in the walls, and they were coming closer. I knew, to the marrow in my bones, that I was not by myself. The house was not only old, it was haunted. And whatever haunted it was now awake, and it was on the move toward me. I was stuck in my bedroom, desperately seeking information, some kind of understanding of the events unfolding. I recalled my great-aunt Beatrice's study, a room I had barely entered since taking over the household. It was crowded with her books and papers, a jumble of obscure information that had always unsettled me. But somewhere among the chaos, perhaps, lay an answer. I steeled myself and slipped out of my bedroom, flashlight clutched in my hand. The hall was quiet now, the growling and scratching having stopped. But the quiet was even scarier than the noise had been. It was like a predator holding its breath, poised to pounce. I navigated to the study of Beatrice, a chamber at the far end of the hall, darkened by shadows. The door was oak and thick, with an elaborate carving of a serpent curled upon it. I lingered for an instant, my fingers shaking as I went to grasp the doorknob. I took a breath, then pushed the door ajar. The room was just as I had left it, disorganized, dusty, and saturated with books. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling along the walls, packed and crowded with books of every shape and dimension. Papers were strewn about the desk, on the floor, on every flat space. The smell of old paper and dust clung to the air, the familiar odor one I associated with rot. I flipped on the overhead light, casting a faint, yellowish illumination over the space, and saw the complete scope of the disarray. Where to start? I began with the desk, sorting through the paper stacks. Much of it was routine, old bills, mail, shopping lists. But then my eye landed on something interesting, a leather-bound journal, the pages yellowed and brittle. The diary belonged to Beatrice. I recognized her unique script. I opened it gingerly, fearful of tearing the thin pages. The diary was dated, running over a period of many decades, tracking her life, her musings, and her interests. The image of Beatrice slowly materialized in my mind, an image vastly different from the quirky but kindly old woman whom I had previously gotten to know. She was drawn to the occult, to ancient faiths, to the secret things of the cosmos. She described rituals, incantations, summonings from beyond. My blood chilled as I understood the significance of what I was seeing. Had Beatrice unknowingly released something into the house? Had she opened a door to something it was better left shut? I scanned the journal in hopes of discovering some answers. And then I stumbled upon an entry which halted my heart. It was dated a few weeks prior to her passing. The walls are thinning. They are listening. I can hear them whispering in the dark. I must finish the ritual. I must bind them before they break through. The walls are thinning. These words reflected the message I had gotten. They're in the walls. It wasn't an accident. It was a link. Beatrice had been aware of the entity in the walls. She had attempted to end it. And she had been unsuccessful. I read on, eager to know what ritual she had been attempting to fulfill. The journal was incomplete, fragmented, the text a jumble of cryptic symbols and unreadable references. I could glean a few significant facts from it, however. The ritual consisted of a precise series of incantations, the alignment of certain objects in specific positions around the house, and the burning of a specific incense made from exotic herbs. The purpose was to build a protective boundary, a shield, to keep the beings in the walls from penetrating into our world. But Beatrice never completed the ritual. She had perished before she could finish it, leaving the house unprotected, the boundary incomplete. And now the entities were breaching the gaps. I shut the journal, my head spinning. I had to finish what had been begun by Beatrice. I had to see the ritual through. It was the only thing to do to save myself, to save the house, to rid the walls of whatever was festering in the walls. Where would I go to discover what I sought to learn? The journal was fragmented. I wanted something more. I wanted Beatrice's books. I turned to the shelves, my gaze running over the titles. Hundreds of books sat there, many in languages I couldn't decipher. I began to pull them off at random, leafing through the pages, seeking out something which might be useful. The hours ticked by. The first dawn light crept around the edge of the curtain, casting shadows on the floor. I was fatigued, my eyes stinging, my head hurting. But I would not quit. At last I found it. Standing at the back of a shelf, concealed behind a thicker tome, was a little, bound in leather book called Bedtime, the Book of Shadows. This was it. This was the missing piece. I opened the book and started to read. The book was packed with intricate instructions for the ritual, the specific incantations to be used, the objects needed, and the exact spots where they were to be placed. It was a risk. The ritual was intricate, challenging, and possibly deadly. But I had no option. I had to attempt it. Reading through the instructions, I noted I already had some of the ingredients on hand. Beatrice had gone ahead to collect the objects and make the incense at home, preparing it in advance for the ritual. These were placed in a concealed compartment behind the living room fireplace. I shut the book, a feeling of dark resolve descending on me. It was time to take action. It was time to face the shadows in the walls. With the Bedtime in hand, I went down to the living room. The house seemed different in the daytime, less threatening, but still fraught with an undertone of unease. The atmosphere was thick, stale, as though the house were holding its breath. The fireplace loomed large, a monolith of a structure running from floor to ceiling. I crouched in front of it, hunting for the secret compartment. It took a few moments of fumbling around to find a loose stone and to push it in. Softly, a section of the wall swung open, revealing a dark alcove. Among the objects wrapped in cloth in the compartment were a chalice made of silver, a knife made of bone, a bundle of dried herbs, and a little pot made of clay containing a dark scented powder. These were my tools for the ritual. I unwrapped the objects with delicacy, setting them out upon the floor. The silver chalice was tarnished, but still radiated faint luster in the sunlight. The knife made of bone was cold and slippery in my hand. The dry herbs carried a faint, earthy smell. The pot made of clay contained the incense, whose fragrance was an odd blend of sweet and bitter, both enticing and revolting. In the Bedtime, the procedure was to put the objects in particular places around the house, mark the walls with protective symbols using the bone knife, chant the incantations, and burn the incense. Sequence was the key. A deviation would bring catastrophic results. I began with the silver chalice. The book directed me to put it in the middle of the attic, a space I had never entered. The attic was a dark, dusty room, a place of forgotten objects and cobwebs. It seemed to be a repository of the house's secrets, a space where shadows dwelled and memories stuck to the air. Holding the chalice close to my body, I climbed the stairs, my heart racing in my chest. The stairs groaned beneath my weight, each one of them echoing through the empty, still house. I felt an increasing sense of foreboding the higher I climbed, as though something was following me, something waiting in the attic. I made it to the attic door, a thick solid wood sheet that felt icy to the touch. I hesitated momentarily, taking a breath, and then pushed it ajar. The attic was worse than I had pictured it. Dust particles swirled in the slivers of sunlight filtering through the filthy windows, highlighting the stacks of discarded things, old pieces of furniture, shattered toys, heaps of aged newspaper. The air was thick with the acrid smell of dust and rot. I approached the center of the room, my flashlight slicing through the shadows. The floorboards creaked beneath my steps, on the verge of giving in to gravity at any instant. I put the silver chalice on the floor, its tarnished finish mirroring the faint illumination. Turning to depart, I heard a noise behind. A gentle rustling, as though something stirred in the dark. I whirled around, the beam of my flashlight cutting across the room. I leaned forward, my ears straining to hear. The rustling sound returned, louder this time. It was coming from the back of the collection of old trunks. My heart pounded in my chest. I crept towards the trunks, my flashlight cast forward to the black space at their backs. The rustling grew louder as I got closer, with a low, guttural growl. Next, something emerged from around the trunks. A dark, small form moving with astounding velocity. It went too quickly to obtain a proper glimpse, but I saw partially enough to recognize that it was not human. I would describe it as wiry and small, with spindly, lengthy limbs and red, glowing eyes. It crawled along the floor with an appalling facility, much akin to a spider. I let out a cry and backed away, my flashlight slipping from my hand. The attic went black. The thing hissed, the sound making my flesh crawl. I struggled towards the door, eager to flee. But the monster was quicker. It landed on my back, its talons tearing my flesh. I yelled again, thrashing around, desperate to rid myself of it. But it stuck to my body like a leech, pinning me to the ground. I sensed its breath along my neck, its heat and stench. It spoke to my ear, a sound not quite words, but something ancient and wicked. Then it bit me. Searing, intense pain cut through my body. I screamed, a cry of raw agony. The venom from the creature was traveling through my veins, poisoning my body from the inside out. I became unconscious. I woke to find myself on the floor of the attic, my body hurting throughout. The monster had vanished. The chalice remained in the middle of the room, its tarnished finish shining in the sunlight. I slowly sat up with my head reeling. The wound on my neck hurt. I raised my hand to touch it. My fingers were streaked with blood. I stumbled to my standing position, my legs weighed down with an unnatural heaviness. I had to move out of the attic. I had to complete the ritual. And as I headed back down the stairs, I noticed something different. Something was amiss. The house now felt colder, darker, its atmosphere more oppressive. Shadows deepened, lengthened, seemed to reach out to grasp. And I could hear them. The whispers. They were emerging from the walls. At first, barely audible, but increasing with every step I made. Whispers of hate, of malice, of unfathomable evil. They're in the walls, I said to myself, recalling the voicemail. They were in my head as well. The walls were thinning. They were breaking through. The muttering grew louder as I made my way down the stairs, a jumble of tongues around my ears, taunting, threatening. Pain, suffering, perpetual agony. I squeezed my head, trying to shut them out, but they wouldn't let up, cutting into my mind, infecting my brain. I stumbled into the living room, my body trembling, my mind reeling. The bone knife and the clay pot of incense were still lying on the floor, where I had left them. I had to continue the ritual. I had to banish the entities before they consumed me completely. I took the bone knife and, as instructed by the Liberum, started to mark protective symbols all over the walls. The symbols were complicated and intricate, taking precise strokes and steady attention. The whisperings were interfering with it all, making it hard to maintain attention. My hand trembled, my mind strayed, and the symbols were twisted and lopsided. When I drew the symbols, the temperature in the room plummeted. A chilly wind rushed through the home, dousing the sunlight and casting the room into shadow. I began to feel the presence of the entities intensifying, their power rising with every second. I disregarded the fear and continued on to the next part of the ritual, the burning of incense. I opened the potted incense and breathed in the odd, pungent smell. The smell overcame my senses, and I felt dizzy and light-headed. I took a pinch of the incense, and placed it on a small brazier that Beatrice had left near the fireplace. I lit the incense with a match, and a plume of dark smoke began to rise, filling the room with its strange, intoxicating scent. As the smoke billowed around me, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They were no longer just whispering. They were screaming, roaring, shrieking. They were inside my head, tearing me apart from the inside out. I backed away, my hands covering my ears, desperate to block out the sound. But it was to no avail. The voices permeated every part of the room, unavoidable. Then I beheld them. Emerging from the walls, from the shadows, from the very air around me. The entities. They were grotesque, ghastly things, distorted parodies of life. They were thin and wiry, similar to the monster which had attacked me in the attic, but there were others. Tall, lean figures with spindly limbs and empty eye sockets where their eyes ought to have been. Bloated, shapeless masses of flesh with yawning maws filled with rows of sharp teeth. They surrounded me, filling the space around me, closing in. Their eyes burned with cruel purpose, their faces twisted into looks of sheer hatred. I screamed, a scream of abject fear. I knew I was doomed. There was no escape. Then, however, something unexpected occurred. As the entities reached out to grab me, they recoiled in pain. The protective symbols I had drawn on the walls, however imperfect, were working. They were holding the entities back, preventing them from touching me. The entities hissed and snarled, frustrated by their inability to reach me. They clawed at the walls, their fingers scraping against the stone. They lunged at me, their bodies contorting in unnatural ways. But they couldn't break through the barrier. I knew I still had a chance. If I could finish the ritual, if I could fortify the protective barrier, then perhaps I could rid them completely. I forced myself to focus, ignoring the pain, the fear, the whispers. I grabbed the Liber Umbrarum and began to chant the incantations, my voice trembling but determined. The incantations were long and complex, filled with arcane words and ancient phrases. As I chanted, I felt a surge of power coursing through my body, a tingling sensation that spread from my fingertips to my toes. A soft, ethereal glow filled the room. The symbols of protection on the walls pulsed with energy and a soft luminescence. The incense smoke grew thicker, creating a defensive cloud around my body. The entities recoiled further, their screams growing louder, more desperate. They knew that they were losing. I continued chanting, my voice growing stronger, more confident. The power flowing through me intensified, pushing back the darkness, banishing the evil. Then, suddenly, I experienced a sharp chest pain. A burning, excruciating pain causing me to struggle to breathe. I looked down and saw a dark stain spreading across my shirt. I reached up and touched my chest. My fingers came away bloody. The bite on my neck. The venom. It was coursing through my body, poisoning my system, killing me. I knew that I was dying. But I couldn't stop. I had to finish the ritual. I went on chanting, my words stumbling, my body failing. The energy surging through my system slowly started to dissipate, giving way to an increasing feeling of desperation. The entities sensed my weakness. They surged forward, their eyes glowing with renewed hope. They clawed at the weakening barrier, their bodies straining to break through. I knew that I couldn't hold them back much longer. I was losing the battle. Then I remembered something. Something I'd read, written in a journal by Beatrice. A final incantation. A desperate measure. A sacrifice. I looked at the silver chalice lying on the floor. The chalice that I had placed in the attic. The chalice that had been tainted by the creature's presence. The article described how, during the most extreme situations, the chalice might be employed as a receptacle to hold the entities, sealing them into its tarnished exterior forever. A sacrifice was necessary. a willing surrender of a person's very life energy. It was a last resort, a suicidal act. But I had no choice. I grasped the chalice with a shaky hand. The beings cheered in exuberance. They recognized what was about to take place. I shut my eyes and started to recite the last incantation, the words barely above a whisper. As I chanted, I felt my life force draining away, flowing into the chalice. The power of the entities surged into it, too, drawn to the vessel like moths to a flame. The chalice began to glow, its tarnished surface radiating an intense, blinding light. The entities shrieked in agony as they were pulled into the chalice, their forms dissolving, their essence trapped. Then silence. The light faded. The room returned to darkness. The whispers ceased. The beings had vanished. I opened my eyes to see the chalice sitting in front of me, still radiating a faint glow, its surface rippling with stored energy. I knew that I had done it. I had banished the entities. I had saved the house. I had paid the final price. My body went numb, my mind losing hold. I was slipping away, floating into the shadows. I smiled as I breathed my last. I was finally free. Darkness enveloped me. No pain, no fear, no whisper. Only a boundless, empty space. I floated in the blackness, with no conception of time or space. I was nothing, and yet, at the same time, I was everything. Next, a flash of light. A soft glow in the distance. I was attracted to it, a moth to a flame. As I approached, the light intensified, warmed, and seemed to beckon. I stepped out from the blackness and into a world of unadulterated light and energy. It was a world of breathtaking magnificence, with vivid hues and enchanting symphonies. I was enveloped in an abiding peace and calm that I had never previously known. I was unencumbered by my body. I was consciousness, untethered and unrestrained, with the ability to move and discover unfettered. I floated in the light, and I was amazed at the beauty all around. Subsequent to this, I noticed a figure in the distance. A woman, peaceful and radiant, standing in the middle of the light. Closer and closer I approached her, and I knew her. It was Beatrice. She smiled at me, her eyes warm and sympathetic. "You did it," she told me. "You've saved the house." "And I died," I replied. "Death isn't an end, it's a transition," she responded. "You've gone on to a higher plane of life." "What about the house?" I asked. "Is it safe to return to?" "Yes," she replied. "The entities are gone. The house is safe. But it will always remain susceptible. It's a nexus point, a spot where the veil between worlds is thin." "What do I do?" I asked. "You will need to find a caretaker for the house," she instructed. "A person who knows its history, knows its strength, knows its fragility. A person who will defend it from danger." "Who?" I asked. "Turn to the person you trust," Beatrice instructed. "A person who loves the house as much as you do." When I scoured my memories, all I could think of was one person, my cousin Elizabeth. Though she didn't exactly care for the home per se, nor even enjoy a visit, she would pay respects and reverence to the history and legacy of the home. And most importantly, she would keep intact the contents inside. "Elizabeth," I stated. "I will locate." "That's your decision," Beatrice replied. "But keep in mind, the house isn't a mere building. It's a living thing, with a spirit and a destiny all its own." "I understand," I replied. Beatrice smiled at me again. "Goodbye," she said. "A path of discovery begins for you." Then she walked away and disappeared into the light. I was once again by myself, but I wasn't scared. I had a mission. I had a purpose. I turned and gazed back toward the blackness, back toward the world I'd left behind. I wasn't going to be able to go back, but I could keep an eye on Elizabeth, and provide guidance to her if she needed it. With one last act of will, I concentrated my mind on the house, on Elizabeth, on the future. In the world of the living, the sun was rising over the old Victorian home. The home sat quietly and motionless, its windows mirroring the golden glow. Inside, the chalice of silver lay on the ground, its tarnished finish glowing dimly. The protective symbols along the walls seemed to shimmer and disappear. The incense smoke had cleared. The home was unoccupied. But it was no longer haunted. It had found peace. Weeks went by, and Elizabeth inherited the home. She sold all the contents and padlocked the doors for good. She never heard the whispers. She never sensed the presence of the entities. She never learned of the sacrifice made to keep her safe. And somewhere in the world of light and energy, I was watching over her. I was guarding her. I was safeguarding her. And the house waited quietly in anticipation of its next chapter, its next fate. The Unseen Guest. Lila Bennett resided in a small, ivy-clad bungalow on the outskirts of Willow Creek, a quiet village where nothing ever seemed to occur. Her home was her haven, a place of routine and solitude, where everything was neatly in order. The bathroom, its sparkling white surfaces and highly polished fixtures, was her pride and joy. She cleaned it each day, wiping down the sink, the counter, and the large oval mirror that hung above them. So, when she spotted the fingerprint on the mirror that cold autumn morning in October, it brought her to a halt. The print was tiny, near childlike, pressed into the middle of the glass. It wasn't smudged or indistinct, but clean, like someone had pushed a finger there just a moment ago. Lila scowled, her face reflected back to her, twisted by the light of morning. She was alone. No one had been in her home, not even a visitor, in months. She grabbed the glass cleaner, sprayed the mirror, and scrubbed it hard, but the discomfort persisted. Had she done it herself and not remembered? Her hands were bigger, her fingers longer. This finger was too small. She shook it off, blaming it on a trick of the mind. The house was from the 1800s and creaked at night, telling her stories of past owners. Lila, a pragmatic woman of 30, wrote the strange occurrences off as the quirk of an old house. But throughout her day working from home as an editor, the recollection of that fingerprint nagged at her. She kept finding herself looking toward the door to the bathroom, expecting to see someone there. That evening, after dinner, she went back to the bathroom to brush her teeth. The mirror was pristine, its reflection of her weary eyes. She stepped closer, looking at her reflection, when her breath stopped. Another fingerprint had materialized, this one by the rim of the mirror. It was exactly like the first one, small, clean, new. Her heart pounded. She looked around at the windows, the doors. Each one was secure, just as she'd left them. She was alone. No one could have gotten in. Lila pulled out her phone and took a picture of the print before erasing it. She looked at the picture, zooming in. The ridges were distinctive, unmistakable. She compared them to her own fingerprints, laying her thumb on a glass and taking a picture of it. The difference was dramatic. Hers was bigger, the whorls unmistakable. This one was not, belonged to someone else, or to something else. Sleep evaded her that evening. The quiet of the cottage, once a comfort, seemed overwhelming. Each creak of the wooden boards, each moan of the wind, was the sound of footsteps. She was in her bed, holding her phone, the image of the fingerprint shining in the dark. She thought to call someone, a friend, her brother, but what could she tell them? That she feared a fingerprint? It was preposterous. The following morning, She checked her reflection again. No new fingerprints, but the lack of them did not comfort her. She also started noticing other things that didn't feel quite right. A glass on the counter that she must have left there because that's where it's always kept. A faint smudge on the floor that she didn't recall leaving. The house no longer felt solely hers. She found herself locking the door to the bathroom when no one else was there, a habit that seemed silly and required. Her nerves were frayed by the time evening approached. Standing by the mirror, brushing her hair, she spotted it, a third fingerprint, on top this time. Her brush clattered in the sink. The fingerprint was new, the lines distinctive, as if it appeared when she was standing there. She turned around, looking around the room. Nobody. Nothing. Her heart was thumping against her chest as she wiped the mirror clean with her still shaking hands. She did not take a picture today. She didn't want to look at it. Lila sat on her couch, staring at the door to her bathroom, now locked. She searched online for unexplained fingerprints, and came across reports of haunting, pranks, even carbon monoxide poisoning-induced hallucinations. She tested her CO detector functioning just fine. She wasn't hallucinating. The fingerprints were real. She thought of leaving, staying at a hotel, but the idea of leaving her home to some unknown intruder, human or otherwise, to fend for themselves seemed like defeat. At midnight there was a gentle rapping at the bathroom door. Her blood chilled. The door was shut, the key in her possession. She edged closer, putting her ear to the door. A second tap, quiet but insistent, like a tap against glass. She didn't open it. She couldn't. She went back to her room, locking that door also, and lay awake through the rest of the night waiting to hear nothing. The fingerprints were not marks anymore. They were messages, indications of something, or someone, occupying her space. Lila wasn't aware of what it sought, but it wasn't going to leave. And neither was she. Lila awoke to a gray dawn and gritty, sleep-deprived eyes. The recollection of the knocking at the bathroom hung around her like damp mist. The bathroom was shunned, the kitchen sink serving instead to clean her face, but the siren's call of the mirror could not be resisted. She needed to know if it had etched another sign. With a deep breath, the lock of the bathroom door was turned, her hand hovering over the knob. The glass shone in the fluorescent light, clean on first impression. Then there was a single fingerprint, dead center, smaller than hers, its edges sharp and new. Her belly twisted. She hadn't come near the mirror since cleaning it the night before. She rechecked the locks again, doors, windows, everything secure. No forced entry traces, no footprints on the hardwood. She resided in a one-person household, but the evidence indicated otherwise. She snapped another photo, her hands calmer now, driven by a combination of terror and resolve. She wasn't dreaming. Something was in her home. Lila spent the morning doing research. She read through forums, newspaper archives from years back, anything and everything pertaining to her cottage or to Willow Creek. The house was constructed in 1823, and it changed hands numerous times. There was one article that spoke of a family that resided there back in the 1920s, but that was it, nothing of why they'd moved out. There was nothing of ghost stories, but no lack of explanations reassured her. She required evidence, something solid in addition to the fingerprints. She purchased a small security camera online with same-day shipping. It arrived by afternoon, a sleek monitor with motion detection. It went in the bathroom, pointed towards the mirror. If someone, or anything, was making those prints, she'd catch it. The red light blinked, a small comfort in the quiet house. She closed the bathroom door once again, holding the key, and attempted to work. Her emails sat unread, her corrections done half-heartedly. The cottage was a stranger's home. That night, she viewed the footage on the camera. There was nothing. The mirror was not disturbed, the bathroom quiet. She nearly breathed a sigh of relief, until the timestamp. The camera blinked out at 3:17 a.m. without reason. She inspected the device, charged, no breakdown. She went into the bathroom, and a new print welcomed her, this one at the bottom of the mirror. Her legs shook. The camera hadn't recorded it. It was intelligent, deliberate, whoever or whatever was doing it. Lila started to document the prints in a notebook, recording the places, the times, and the measures. Each was small, a child's, but the uniformity disturbed her. They cropped up at random, at times several hours between them, at others just a few minutes. She ceased erasing them, allowing them to build up as evidence. By dusk, there were 3 new prints on the mirror, a crude triangle. She mapped out where they were, looking for a pattern, but found none. The cottage groaned around her, the creaks noisier now, more deliberate. She rang her brother, Ethan, wanting a voice to steady her. She didn't tell him the fingerprints, just that nothing felt quite right. He told her he'd come over, but he lived several hours away, and she wasn't eager to sound crazy. After that phone call, she was lonelier than ever. The bathroom door remained shut, but the tapping was back again, a light touch, like a fingertip against the glass. She pretended not to notice, wrapping up in a blanket on the couch, the Cam's app on her phone. At 2 a.m., the application beeped. Motion detected. Her heart skipped a beat when she opened the live feed. The bathroom was vacant, the mirror just dark. Then there was a shadow, fleeting, shapeless, before her eyes could even focus. She rewound the clip, slowed it down. The shadow was tiny, down near the floor, like a child squatting. No fingerprint materialized this time, but the message was explicit. There was something there, lurking, moving when she was not around. Lila thought of leaving, grabbing a bag and driving over to Ethan's. The cottage, her home, her sanctuary. She'd worked years to purchase it, invested her soul into maintaining it. To leave it was to let it win. So instead, she decided to fight back. She ordered even more cameras, intending to blanket the entire house. She researched local historians in the hopes of learning the story of the cottage. Either a ghost, a joke, or something else, there was no way of not finding out. Drifting to sleep, the tapping sounded again, now rhythmic, like a heartbeat. It wasn't coming from the bathroom anymore. It was nearer, behind the couch, under the floor, inside the walls. Lila gripped her phone, the open camera view still displaying nothing but her unoccupied bathroom. The mirror sparkled clean once again. It wouldn't remain that way. Whatever was making those fingerprints was becoming bolder, and she was out of time to catch on. Lila's days went into a routine of tension and terror. The new cameras came, and she set them in the living room, the kitchen, and the bedroom, red lights blinking like unwinking eyes. The one in the bathroom stayed trained on the mirror, to which 5 fingerprints were now attached, each materializing when she was not. She'd quit erasing them, allowing them to create a constellation of fright. The tap, tap, tap increased to a constant occurrence, no longer limited to the bathroom. It came from the attic, the basement, even the walls of her bedroom, always at night, always when she was alone. She arranged to see a local historian, Margaret Voss, at the town library. The wiry, sharp-eyed woman knew the history of Willow Creek better than anyone. Lila brought her notebook, illustrating where the fingerprints were. She did not mention the shadow or the tapping, not wanting to sound crazy. The brow of Margaret furrowed as Lila recited the address of the cottage. That house, Margaret corrected, putting on her glasses, was owned by the Hargrove family back in the 1920s. There was a daughter, Eliza, a 7-year-old. The family just up and left in 1927. Nobody knows why. The rumor around was that they couldn't keep up with the cost of the home, but I've always believed that there was more to it. Lila's skin crawled. A child. The fingerprints were small, those of a child. She asked Margaret to tell her everything, but the historian knew no more than that the Hargroves never returned, that the cottage was vacant for years before new owners moved in. Margaret agreed to research the archives of the town and call if she turned anything up. At home, Lila inspected the cameras. The mirror in the bathroom sported a fresh print, one larger than before, as if pressed down harder. She compared her notebook, 6 impressions now, no discernible pattern. The rest of the cameras saw nothing out of place, but the quiet of the footage was unnerving, like a suspended breath. She couldn't shake the sensation of being watched, even in the middle of the day. Shadows moved out of the corner of her eye, vanished when she turned to see. That evening, she remained in the living room, watching footage. The bathroom monitor recorded something at 1:43 a.m., a brief blur by the mirror, the shape of a hand too quick to catch on film. No fresh fingerprint materialized, but the blur was sufficient to give her a jolt in her stomach. She replayed it, stopping just before the blur occurred. It was small, low to the ground, like a shadow from before. Her hands trembled when she saved the clip. Lila started reading about child haunting, delving into reports of restless children connected to homes. Most of them were sensationalized, but certain aspects rang true. Things moved, noises at night time, the perception of being observed. She stumbled upon one forum post concerning anchor objects, items that spirits were attracted to, like reflective surfaces. The theory stuck with her. The mirror in the bathroom was part of the original furnishings of the cottage, the frame carved with worn-out vines. It could possibly be the root of it? She looked at the mirror carefully, her hand tracing along the border of the frame. It was weighty, anchored to the wall, its glass subtly warped from time. There was a faint etching near the back, just barely legible. For Eliza, 1926. Her heart fell. Eliza Hargrove. The kid from the story. Was she the one making the prints? Lila moved back, her image twisted in the aged glass. The bathroom seemed to grow chilly, the atmosphere thick. Tapping came back again when she was in bed, louder now, from the ceiling. She glared at the plaster, picturing a small, crawling figure in the attic. She didn't investigate. She burrowed under the covers, like a kid covering her head from the dark. The cameras captured nothing that evening, but the lack of evidence just intensified her terror. Whatever it was here did not want to make its presence known, not yet. Margaret rang the next day. She'd discovered a diary in the archives from a neighbor of the Hargroves. It spoke of Eliza's illness, a fever that kept her confined to the cottage for months. Her neighbor wrote of unusual sounds once the family was out, tapping, as if someone lingered in the house. The diary simply ended, with no conclusion. There was a nervous sound in Margaret's voice, warning Lila to exercise caution. Lila didn't sleep that evening. She remained in the living room, monitoring the feeds from the cameras. It was 3 a.m. The pinging sound of the bathroom camera interrupted the quiet. The reflection in the mirror displayed a new fingerprint, but also another image, a faint shape, like a small hand against the glass from within. Lila's breath caught. She zoomed in on it, her phone shuddering in her hand. The shape was no longer there in the next frame, but she knew that she'd seen it. The mirror wasn't just a surface. It was a door. Lila gazed into the mirror, the surface of which was now smeared with 8 fingerprints, each one a silent accusatory finger. The handprint from the footage continued to haunt her, its faint shape seared into memory. She hadn't set foot in the bathroom after seeing it, opting to wash her hands in the kitchen instead, but evasion served to enhance the terror. The cottage no longer belonged to her. It belonged to the entity on the other side of the glass. She required explanations, not of the disappearance of Eliza Hargrove, but of the mirror itself, and why it was holding her. She hired a locksmith to put deadbolts on each door, including the bathroom, but doubted that locks would do any good. She also phoned a local antiques dealer, wondering if they could take a look at the mirror. The dealer, a tough-looking man named Harold, came that afternoon. He examined the mirror, taking note of its antiquity and workmanship. "This is pre-1900. He ran his hand over the carved frame. "Mirrors like these were at times constructed with silver-backed glass, no longer found. It was thought to hold things. Things like memories, perhaps things more." He looked at her uncomfortably. "You sure you want it here?" Lila did not refer to the fingerprints but asked him to examine the engraving. He said it spelled out, "For Eliza, 1926. Probably done after the mirror was made." He made her a proposition to purchase it, but Lila wouldn't let him. Taking it out felt like capitulation. Harold departed, telling her to be careful. "Old things have stories," he repeated, mimicking Margaret. Lila swallowed hard. She researched silver-backed mirrors throughout the day. A few of the occult websites implied that they could capture specters, serving to open doors or hold them back. It was a far-fetched notion, but it was a fit. The fingerprints, the knocking, the shadow, all were focused on the mirror. She thought of shattering it, but then worried about consequences. Would killing it release Eliza or worsen things? That evening, Lila created a new routine, keeping all the lights on, checking the cameras on the hour, and staying away from the bathroom. The tapping trailed after her, now emanating from the walls, the floors, even the mirror of her new bedroom, a sleek, updated one that she'd never even second-guessed. She draped a sheet over it, her fingers quivering. The cottage was alive, its walls thumping with a hidden presence. At midnight the bathroom cam beeped. She opened the feed, anticipating a fingerprint. In place of the fingerprint, there was the ripple of the mirror, like water that has been disturbed by a rock. A small hand against the glass, clearer than before, its fingers outspread. The feed froze, the cam offline. Her heartbeat thumped rapidly as she moved to the bathroom door, the key cold in her hand. She did not unlock it. She could not. She woke Margaret. "The mirror," Lila told her, her words shaking. "It's not a mirror. It's something else." Margaret, half awake but alarmed, agreed to come by the following day with further news. She'd uncovered a second document, a letter from the mother of the deceased, suggesting the girl's fixation on the mirror prior to her death. "She spoke to it," Margaret told her. "Like it spoke back." Lila hadn't slept. She was in the kitchen, away from the bathroom, holding a flashlight. The tapping became insistent, a rhythm that couldn't be ignored. It wasn't random, it was a sequence, a code. She scribbled it down, 3 taps, space, 2 taps, space, 3 again. She had no idea what it meant, but it was like communication. She spoke softly. "Eliza, is that you?" The tapping ceased. The quiet was even worse. Margaret arrived by morning with a folder of copied papers. She displayed the 1927 letter to Lila. The mother of Eliza wrote of her daughter's illness, her preoccupation with the mirror, where it reflected another place. The girl would place her hands against it, making impressions, speaking to someone no one could see. The family moved out after her death, not able to stand the house. The letter closed with a request. "Burn the mirror." Lila's blood chilled. She took Margaret through the footage on the camera, the shattered glass, the hand. Margaret went white, recommending that they call a priest, or a medium. Lila demurred. She wasn't a believer, and inviting in a medium sounded like inviting more variables. But she promised to keep it under consideration. Margaret departed, insisting that she remain somewhere else. Lila wouldn't leave. It was her home. She'd fight to keep it. That night, the knocking started again, louder, quicker. Lila looked at the bathroom camera. The mirror displayed a new fingerprint, but now the glass appeared to absorb light. She heard a whisper, quiet, childlike, from the back of the door. "See me," it whispered. Lila's hand was on the key. She didn't open the door. She didn't want to see. Lila hadn't slept in days. The cottage was a war zone, its atmosphere thick with tension. The mirror in the bathroom wore a dozen fingerprints, their placements wild, like a kid's mad scrawl. The tapping persisted, resonating from each corner, walls, floors, even the ceiling over her mattress. The cameras recorded nothing new, their batteries dipping inexplicably. The whisper, "See me," haunted her, ringing in her mind like a mantra. She knew she could not escape the mirror forever. Whatever was in her house wanted her to look, and it wouldn't rest until she did. She summoned a medium, whom Margaret recommended, who arrived that afternoon. The woman, Iris, moved into the cottage, her eyes darting around with quiet ferocity. She let Lila lead her to the mirror, the film, the notebook of fingerprints. Iris ran her fingers along the frame of the mirror. Her hand paused against the words that were engraved there. "This is a tether," she told Lila. "There's something attached to it. Something older, not just Eliza." Lila's gut churned. Something older than human was far worse than a ghost. Iris incanted a cleansing ritual, burning sage and whispering softly. The air thickened, the tapping louder, like a protest. Lila stood before the mirror, waiting for it to ripple once again, but it did not. Iris completed the ritual, her own face pale. "It's not gone," she told her. "It's not pleased. You must break the mirror." Lila nodded, but a seed of doubt gnawed at her. What if breaking it let out whatever was trapped? That evening, Lila readied. She assembled tools, a hammer, a crowbar, and intended to destroy the mirror and incinerate the fragments. She went to stand before the door of the bathroom, the key clutched in her hand, her heart thudding. The knocking was blaring now, a din from all sides. She opened the door, the mirror staring back at her pale face. The fingerprints shone softly, glowing from within. Then her eyes perceived it, a small form within the glass, not her reflection. A girl, pale and gaunt, dark-eyed and with a sorrowful smile. "See me," the figure whispered, its voice no longer muted, ringing out in the room. Lila stepped back, the hammer clattering from her hand. The image of the girl wavered, her hand against the glass, leaving a second print. The mirror ruffled, the surface fluid, and the girl moved into the room, her foot stepping over the frame into the bathroom. Lila shrieked, making a dash for the door, but it slammed shut, the lock clicking into place. She was standing there before her, not a solid body but not a ghost, her shape wavering like heat distortions. "Stay," she told her, and her words were a balance of entreaty and command. Lila's legs turned to water. The hands were small, the fingerprints a match. But the eyes were not. Too dark, too deep, like holes. Something besides Eliza was here. Iris was not mistaken. There was a crowbar within reach. Lila used it to swing at the mirror. The glass shattered, shards scattering across the tiles. The girl was not to be seen, but the tapping persisted. It increased in intensity, emanating from the broken pieces. Lila ran, barricading herself into her bedroom, but the sound persisted, now in her mind. She phoned Iris, talking wildly of the girl, the mirror. Iris offered to come back with assistance, but Lila was certain that it was too late. The cottage came to life now, creaking from the walls, the atmosphere cold and damp. Lila packed a small bag, Her hands trembled, set on leaving. But just before the front door, her fingers paused on the knob, small, new, eerily glowing fingerprints. She moved to check the windows too. There were finger marks there. The presence was no longer in the mirror. It was everywhere in the cottage, closing her out. Iris came in at dawn with a priest, but the door would not open. She yelled through the wood, instructing Lila to hold on. She sat in the living room amidst the useless cameras, her ears ringing to the tapping. It spelled out words now. Stay. See me. She spotted the girl again, flashing in the corner, her smile erased, her eyes bottomless. Lila's eyes are shut, apologizing under her breath to Eliza, to herself, to whoever is within earshot. When Iris and the priest entered by breaking in, the cottage was vacant. Lila was nowhere to be found, her backpack left by the door. The shards of the mirror were brushed into a tidy heap, each one coated with a small fingerprint. The knocking ceased, but the atmosphere was off, thick with absence. Iris incinerated the shards, the priest offering a blessing over the flames. The cottage lay silent afterward, its new owners never mentioning a single unusual occurrence. But in Willow Creek, there are rumors. There are those who claim that Lila left, her mind driven mad by isolation. There are those who claim the mirror swallowed her, pulling her into the world that lay within. The new owners don't discuss it, but they shun the bathroom after dark. And on quiet nights, they hear a tap, a single finger on glass, waiting to be discovered.